Welcome back to That Rugby podcast, hosted by the Sports Booth and the one and only Luke Bowden and Hughesy.
Hey,
Hughesy, shall we get straight to it? Obviously a
yeah.
weekend for me to enjoy, a weekend for you to probably be a little sour. Now, I will state that I went to the Wallabies game in an All Blacks jumper, not this one, but the new All Blacks jumper that I was obviously have bought and purchased. I then proceeded to take off my jacket at the end of the game, look around at all the Wallaby supporters and say, bring on the Bledisloe, bring on the Bledisloe, bring on the Bledisloe. Yes! And that was my Saturday night, getting pelted and yelled at by angry Wallabies fans who have been through
Yeah, I was going to say
strife.
that's in Parramatta as well. Like that's not the it's not the nicest of Wallaby crowds there out in Parramatta.
So, look,
The people have been stabbed to death in the Westfields. There is all I'm going to say. So you're lucky.
I
I'm
came out
very lucky you're here with
unscathed.
me.
I came out unscathed, probably because it was a Wallabies game and not a Kangaroos game, but I came out unscathed. The Wallabies did not, though. So let's start with them, my friend.
Well, yeah. Look, let's first go to man of the match for that game, which was Jaco Piper. I mean, what a performance! And of course, people will say that you shouldn't put yourself in a position where a refereeing decision decides the outcome. But it wasn't just one refereeing decision; it was multiple across the whole game. And the referee put the Wallabies in a position to not be able to compete in that game. Like when possession in the first half is 70-30, that's just wrong, especially when it's a tier one. It's just unnecessary pings all the time. And don't get me wrong, Wallabies weren't spotless by any stretch of the imagination, right? But when it's so blatantly one-sided like that, and you can't tell me the Argentinians weren't doing the same things that the Wallabies were doing, if not worse, at points. It's just they've got that Latino fire where they argue back more. It seems like the more that they chatted to the ref, the more that the things went their way. So I don't know. Maybe that's something for Slipper and Hoops to take into the next game, to chat more to the referee and complain more, because that seems to be the way that's how the South Africans win. That's how the Argentinians won that one. The Argentinians played very well and very hard as well. Don't get me wrong, but far out, that was a frustrating game to watch. Now, there's definitely areas the Wallabies could step up and improve, and there were things that I liked. I mean, we saw Marky Mark, just what a standout. Vunivalu's next time Vunivalu sees gold, it'll be watching someone else in an Olympic medal ceremony. Like he's not putting on a gold jersey again unless he's in the stands, or he goes back to the NRL and puts on like a Titans jersey or something. He shouldn't see Wallabies colours again, because the difference between what Marky Mark brought to the table defensively under the high ball and things like that, interception try, and offensively as well, incredible, absolutely incredible. Um, Real sour note for the Wallabies, and I think this is probably overlooked for the impact it had on the game, was losing Len Ikitau early. Right, that's your
Totally.
outside center, one of the only players that couldn't be really replaced. Like if either of their centers went down, hard fix to replace. Carter Gordon, though, I think he did a magnificent job. He's what a player. His little bits that he's been in Wallabies colours have been electric. Anytime he touched the ball, he was making stuff happen. Um, Look, I think based on because he didn't start this week, I don't think he's going to get the start for the Bledisloe, which disappoints me. Um, because he's shown that he's a great playmaker with the ball in his hand. Quades looked a bit off the pace to me. It looked a bit unready. A lot of times, there's a lot of times when Nick White would make a play where he'd take it from the ruck, run across the face a little bit, and then go to pass it back inside. I think 2 out of 3 times, Quade either dropped it or wasn't fast enough to hit that gap. I think if you got Carter Gordon pushing through that hole, that's a big line break that could be made there. And he's a bit more physical than Quade as well. I loved how he muscled up in defense, just absolutely took it to the Argentinians. So I think, and you said either last week or the week before that he is the first time you sort of seen a Wallabies 10 in a while that's scared you, and
Yeah.
I he definitely put that more on display this week. Um, other my other real high point for this one, before we get into sort of low points, was when Angus Bell came on. Just looked like an absolute unit, ran the ball really hard, breaking tackles, and definitely looks like he's back to full fitness and form. And if he can keep that up, and if Tupou comes back relatively healthy as well, that front row rotation is going to be deadly. You know, Slipper and Alatoa, who had decent games, definitely better than their Springbok efforts, backed up by Bell and Tupou. I think, yeah, Bell and Tupou to close out a game would be immense. Or even you just do a full South African system, half-half. You know, 40 minutes Slipper and Alatoa, 40 minutes Bell and Tupou. Crazy.
Totally. Look, yeah, I mean, going back to Jaco Piper and as well, like from a neutral standpoint, I don't want to say he favoured one side, but there was definitely the difference in watching the All Blacks game beforehand, even just on TV, and watching the Wallabies in Argentina. And it wasn't down to quality of teams. As much as the other two teams were quality, there was a deciding factor, and that was that Jaco Piper nitpicked the fuck out of that game. Like, he just, every 2 seconds he had the opportunity, he could have let things go, which he didn't. And at every ruck, you could probably call a penalty. At every single ruck, you could probably call a penalty. Somewhere along the lines, there could be a penalty. We watched the All Blacks, the first 7 minutes was just non-stop. Like, it was incredible to watch. That's the rugby we want to be watching. I went to Argentina, obviously Wallabies, and I kind of sat there and I was like, other than like the finish and a couple of really good tries, that was a pretty average game of rugby to witness. And that disappoints anyone a little bit. Like, you know, that's not what you want you want the teams to sort it out on the field and not the referee. So I think, I can see the frustration from the Wallabies fans, yourself included, with Jaco Piper. I think I'd be the same if it happened to New Zealand. But I do think, I think it was an all-round poor performance rather than focused on you guys. But I can understand, especially coming away with the result. When you look at the numbers like you did as well, it skews into the Argentina favour totally. But
which makes it, which is really hard. Like, this is a new coach that's come in. Like, sure, Eddie's a veteran coach, but it's his second game with the team. You know, you're trying to establish patterns. You're trying to see what your players are doing, and when they're just getting picked, and what you said, nitpicking is very accurate for absolutely rubbish stuff. How are you supposed to assess that? How can you look at that player when you believe that they didn't do anything wrong and tell them what to correct? Like, what are they supposed to correct? Like, of course there were instances where they could correct some stuff. Don't get me wrong, but the other ones when it's just, just not on. It's like, what are you supposed to do there? When the other side is doing something and they're getting away with it, and you do it and you get picked on, you either give the opposing team, an advantage by not being able to play on equal terms, or you get penalised for it, which also gives the opposing team the advantage. So you're playing with one arm tied behind your back, and that's very frustrating. You can see some of that frustration creep into the game, but for me, it was a hard watch, and I think the Wallabies did well to keep it as close as they did. And even the last try, the fact that there wasn't any review of the knock-on that the Wallabies, where the captain is saying, "Can you have a look at it?" and the referees just ignored him. It's just, that's.
Did you watch on TV? Obviously, you watched on TV, because at the ground, no one could understand what was happening. Like, did they ever? And I still haven't seen it. Did they ever send it up? Was it ever sent up?
They did. So they only looked at the grounding of the ball. They didn't look at the plays preceding it, which is where the Wallabies had said there was a knock-on, which is, that's where, I don't know, the NRL, if the fucking NRL can review every try and the lead up to it for knock-ons and things like that, why can't why can't international test matches do that? Like,
totally. I get it. And if it was, I don't know how many phases, again, I missed it completely at the ground, how many phases or what. And I think there can be a limit to how far we go back. And in the end, you've got to leave it up to the referee. But it just,
I think it was literally the one before, which is what was very frustrating.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where you start to get issues. And the issue I had with this game, and it's not no one's fault, it's rugby's fault, if it's anyone's fault, is you'll go back, World Rugby could probably go back, watch Jaco Piper's game and go, every decision he made was correct. Like again, and I'm not saying that from a point of view that, yes, he may have made a couple of penalties where if we went back and reviewed every penalty it was wrong, but his general decisions were correct. It was just, as I said, nitpicking where you can either decide
applied.
Yeah, exactly. How he applied those rules as well. Like, it's going to make it really interesting when the Rugby World Cup comes around and how teams, I guess, changed with the referees? Like, how do you...
Mm.
Because that's something that I guess the Wallabies didn't do well. And again, it's not something you can go in that prepared for, is how do you dictate to the referee and what he is applying to the game, because you have to start doing that now. Like that's every international team has to be like, how is the referee refereeing this game, and how can we stay in his good side of the box? So again, as much as a lot of negatives can come from a loss to Argentina at home, and you've mentioned some really good positives, I think Aussie can still take a lot more out of this game than not take out of it, if you know what I mean. Like as bad as a loss is, they take so much out of this game. Like you said, Carter Gordon, playing in the centres with, a dual playmaker role wasn't a bad setup for, in the end when he, like, if I'm Eddie Jones now, I'm more confident at carrying a 6-2 bench with what Carter Gordon gave me in a second five. So there's lots of things I think Eddie learned, and that's why I think, again, Eddie's so confident going into this All Blacks game that they can turn it around quickly.
And it's a big step forward from the game against the Springboks, right?
Totally.
Like you could see the team development, the strategy change, as well. It's again more roster paring down, more learning who's suitable for my style of rugby or not. And I think the matter of when Carter Gordon becomes the starting 10 is a when and not an if. I think it will happen at some point this year, especially as we head towards the World Cup. I think the closer we get to that, the more likely he is to start. I just really don't want him. I would prefer him to start the Bledisloe at home rather than the Bledisloe in New Zealand.
I'm actually going to go against you here. Now the decision's different. So I wouldn't start him at the Bledisloe at home, and I would start Quaid. And if you win, you're obviously going to start Quaid again at Bledisloe too. Like don't get me wrong, but if you lose, it then means you can start Gordon away from home in that Bledisloe too, with no pressure of winning the Bledisloe, bringing the Bledisloe back, if you know what I mean. So I think you bring him off the bench again, 20 minutes towards the end of that, especially in an All Blacks environment. If the game's close, or even if the game's not close, like he'll get experience in that MCG game, get in front of what's going to be a massive crowd at the MCG. And then if you win, okay, cool, we don't change anything for the second Bledisloe because we've got a chance to win the fucking Bledisloe. You don't do that. If you lose, you go back to him and you go, here's your chance, buddy. If you can beat the All Blacks in New Zealand, you're signing your name into that number 10 jersey for the rest of your life, bud.
Yep.
So
yeah, fair point. It's very good reasoning. And I think there's other roster things that he's got to consider now. Len Ikitau's out until just before the World Cup, until the game against France before the World Cup. So do you recall Hunter Paisami, or he might be injured as well?
I think he's injured as well because he didn't play in the Tonga
well. I think
game.
it's Parisi then.
It has to be because Parisi's been on tour. See, he went to South Africa with them, so yeah. It has to be just about.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if he is injured or not. It looks like he got. Here we go. Re-sign Wallabies sets injury return date.
Currently, Hughesy's just looking for the return of injury-prone Hunter Paisami.
It doesn't say.
No. Well, look, we're going to assume he's injured. No. So if he's not injured, you probably look at a recall just to him in the squad. If he is injured, it has to be Parisi. Because I don't think...
I would even say, yes, you put Parisi into the start and then you bring Paisami into the extended squad or something like that. The Australia A team, I mean, we could talk about that disaster in a little bit, but look, I think then as well, you've got to look at some of the... I think the starting lineup did well for what happened with the injury, right? Except for Tom Wright. Andrew Kellaway can't get back from injury soon enough for my moment. Like, Tom Wright is consistently making mistakes at the back, right? I would have much rather Reece Hodge for this game, for most games now. In fact, like I think Tom Wright has got strong performances on the wing. He's a great, I think Koroibete and Nwangani Tuase are starting wingers, and then Wright's your backup winger. And especially when you come to World Cup, your backup wingers are going to play because you're not going to want to play Koroibete every single game. Yep. In their pool, they've got Wales, Fiji, and someone else.
Georgia and Portugal.
Look, you're not going to be...
I know the pool's off by heart, but...
Uh, let me make sure
Confirm
you're
that.
right
Yeah,
there. You
I
are
am.
very
Look at
very
me.
nice, very nice.
10 points to New Zealand.
So look, you're not going to want to start Corabetti for all of those games. You're not going to want to start Nwanga Tuasi for all those games. You're going to be rotating through some of your depth there. So Wright's still going to get a chance to go, and he's still going to be a valuable addition to that team as well. And even if you don't want to go with the 6-2 split, you want to go with a 5-3 split. He can be that extra player there because he can cover those positions. But he's not starting caliber fullback. He
I
just keeps
think
making mistakes in crucial moments of the game.
I think what we've worked this out already, I think most of Australian fans have worked this out. Tom Wright's got a higher ceiling than Reece Hodge when it comes to the fullback position. Like, he could bust a game open, definitely win you a game. However, he's also got a lower floor than Reece Hodge, where Reece Hodge sits in that middle where it's like you know what you're getting from Hodge, whereas Wright, it's like one game he could break a game open and win you the game. Next game he's making 3 errors and really helping the other team into it. So I think that's what Eddie's trying to work out here is how much can he trust Hodge, Wright? Because Callaway, yes, injured, but other than Hodge, it's like, who's that fullback that's going to be able to break a game open for me? Like, I'm just...
Look, and I think that what you can consider though at the moment is that you've got with Corabetti and Nwanga Tuasa now, you've got two genuine playmaking wings. We don't necessarily need your fullback to be that playmaker as well. Maybe just a facilitator and setting up the wingers to have those great runs. You've got Karevi as well, who's making plays. Parisi, when he's on his game and he's healthy, can be a great outside set of playmaker as well. Like in games like that against Argentina, where you can afford to have that safety net at the back. And I think even against South Africa, it would have been great to have that safety net at the back. I mean, I understand. Look, I don't actually question Eddie's decision to start Hodge at inside center and Karevi off the bench for that South Africa one because he's being cautious ahead of the World Cup, right? Any other year, I would have second guessed that. For a year in which there's a World Cup coming up and you need your players healthy and it's your first game coaching, and he's had a major injury before, fine. That is what it is. Whatever. I think that when you put Karevi on, what I do question is why leave Tom Wright on and not move Hodge to fullback and Karevi at 12 at that point, then when you could see Wright wasn't doing anything. And his speed wasn't making up enough for Vunivalu's shortcoming. But yeah, I understand the logic there for that. I think for this next game against New Zealand with the Bledisloe, Andrew Kellaway might be back by then. I don't know. This is one thing that also frustrates me with rugby as well. Like you look at other sports, injury news is like clockwork. You can see exactly how long they're out for. It's everywhere. Especially NFL is the one to look at. They have like injury trackers and things like that.
NRL has
Where's
it
that
as
for
well. NRL's really
NRL
good
as
at
well? Where's
casualty
that
ward.
for union? It's so hard to find out when people are injured.
I
And yeah,
what do
so
you,
maybe Callaway's back for that. Maybe he's not. But I still think you can't put Tom Wright back there.
what do you reckon about like a Carter Gordon Quade Cooper 10-15 combo? Just out of interest, not saying throw them in the deep end this time. I'm just wanting to hear your thoughts on it. Do you think that could, like, we've just seen Richie Mo'unga, Damac with Bowden Barrett at the back absolutely rip it up, and Bowden Barrett hasn't played a game at fullback all year. Could Carter Gordon make that switch? He hasn't obviously got the speed of Barrett, but he's got the kicking, the IQ's up there as well.
Yeah. Look, I wouldn't go for it. For me, Carter Gordon needs more experience just playing as a Wallaby, before he starts doing positional rotation. I mean, he did it for this game with center, but playing center and starting, coming in center for an injured player and starting at fullback against the All Blacks is two totally different propositions.
Totally.
Quade Cooper, I don't think he could play fullback. I think he's probably a bit too old, probably lost a little bit too much pace now. And to be honest, it's a bit unfortunate for the Wallabies that in the two games that they've played, they haven't really been able to do the Quade Cooper hand off to Carter Gordon, like a regular 10 to back up 10 that was sent throughout the Super Rugby Pacific season. I want to see how that goes. Quade Cooper steering the ship for the first part, and then you get your Carter Gordon in that 10 position. I would rather Carter Gordon feel out the competition a bit more first. In the future, maybe if that's a skill set he shows he has, maybe. If he can be as good as Bowden Barrett, why not?
Yeah.
Like this kid's uber talented,
Yeah.
uber talented. Next big thing out of Australian rugby, it looks like.
Yep.
And you know, maybe in the future that is something that they can consider. But again, I think he's better off, and I think it would be better off for Australia with him in the 10 and another player like a Kellaway or Pataya in 15. Or if Suoli'i comes over next year, put him there. Max Jorgensen, if he's healthy and showing he can play fullback that well, put him back there as well. Jorgensen adds a little bit more size to his frame. He could be a really good fullback. He showed that for the Waratahs this year when their biggest question is about his defense with his small frame, and he was a key defensive part of the Waratahs' efforts, and they fell apart without him. So, look, I think they've got options, and I think Carter Gordon will be best for the Wallabies in 10.
Shall we get off your Wallabies, you losing fools, and move on to the mighty All Blacks?
Yeah.
Because we took down the beast that is the Springboks, and it was glorious. It was one of the best games we've played in a long, long time. Raced out to a 17-0 start with Shannon Frizzell flicking on his beast mode meter and turning it on, and Will Jordan returning from injury to really break the hearts of the Springboks. So, look, I don't hate the Springboks, obviously. It's a competitive rivalry, us and the All Blacks. But a lot was being said, they sent over 13 players early. They felt like they were up for it. It was really good to put them in their place. Now, I don't think this changes who's favourites going into the World Cup. Like, I think if on neutral ground, it's a completely different ball game. I loved a lot of the tactics we used. I think everyone expects New Zealand to run the ball, and all of a sudden our kicking game was on point. Will Jordan contesting, Mark Talia, two tall wingers contesting, Aaron Smith. Man, I don't know. What, he's like 36 now, and he's still just quite clearly the best 10 in New Zealand rugby by a mighty mile. When he came off and Finlay Christie came on, we definitely lost a little, and just what Aaron Smith is doing will be sorely missed in the coming years. But, I mean, I couldn't sit there and watch that game and point to you one bad All Black performer. It was a total team effort. Whereas the Springboks, it was different. You could definitely point out a couple of players who didn't have good games, which is what makes me go, look, this is definitely not us going in as favourites to this World Cup now. This is a good win, showing a blueprint of how to beat them. But Diolande had a bad game. Visa had a bad game at number 8. I don't think Faf had that good of a game for what Faf's standards is. Vilmasa, the 10, definitely didn't have a good game, and it showed Andre Pollard is missing big time. So, look, it's interesting. It's going to spark a lot of conversations in the bot camp, I think, about what they are going to do. I loved the fact that Erasmus was on a bit of a back foot, where someone asked him about the ref, and asked him about the performance of the ref, and he goes, it wasn't as bad as our performance. So, obviously still got some jokes in him, which is good for rugby. Yeah. But yeah, a good New Zealand win. What can I say?
I love nothing more than seeing the Springboks humbled. So, I don't really want to say too much else because we're playing you next, so I don't want to say anything nice, to be honest. No, look, it just shows. I think a lot of people
bring on the Bledisloe.
No. I think one thing that is actually really impressing me about the All Blacks at the moment is that, and I think this is probably a benefit to how they've handled their coaching decision, right? Is that Ian Foster is playing without any pressure on him right now. He's not coaching for his job, right? He knows every game is essentially his last one, right? He's never going to coach against South Africa in the Rugby Championship again, right? Yep. He might face him in the World Cup, but he's not going to face him in the Rugby Championship again. I think the All Blacks are looking really dangerous, and I think the fact that he doesn't have that pressure on him any longer, whereas last year people were calling for his job ahead of the World Cup. Now it's just like, look, I'm coaching this last year. Whatever happens, and no matter what, I'm going to get work somewhere else next year.
Yeah, totally.
I can just coach without any pressure. I can coach the way I want to coach. I can make the decisions I want to make. And you know what? The worst that can happen is I can get fired early, right? Yeah. I'm already leaving, right? So what's the worst that can happen, really? And I think that's been a real positive for the All Blacks as well. I think actually the All Blacks players are showing that they respect Foster and are playing hard for him. They want to send him out a winner. They want to send him out with a World Cup win as well, and they want it for themselves. They want it for their veterans as well, who might not be around for the next one. They think the All Blacks are really hungry for a World Cup.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I think that it's New Zealand are looking very dangerous.
Yeah, and you've said it really well. Like thinking about, especially Foster, I think he's making the decisions that he's always wanted to make, and just going, you know what, I'm doing it. This is who I am. This is our DNA. But you've got Brodie Retallick leaving, Sam Whitelock leaving, Aaron Smith leaving, Richie Mo'unga leaving, Beauden Barrett probably heading overseas. A few more big names in and around that this is their last hurrah. Shannon Frizzell, another standout. Probably wishes he hadn't signed a contract.
Sam Cane, likely his last.
Likely his last World Cup.
31 years old.
Shannon Frizzell probably wish he had signed the contract after that game, because I imagine his pay would have gone up a couple $100,000 because of what he just did. But a lot of those players are playing like, this is my last year in the black jersey. And like you said, last year we were saying this is the worst All Black team ever, and now we're right in the good spot to be leading up to a Rugby World Cup, beating South Africa on home turf. Go over and play them in Twickenham once more before the World Cup. That'll be really interesting to see. But it's got a lot of people, I think, excited, because, as we said, there's a couple of players that I think didn't play well for South Africa, and I think they'd admit that themselves. They know they've got more in the tank, which means, like I said, we played really well. I don't know if we've got a lot better performances in the tank. Like, that was our best. Now, when South Africa are up to their best and we're at our best, how that will go will be really interesting.
100%.
Australia, mate? Do you want to talk about this disaster now?
Just before we move on to that, it's some interesting news that's just popped up on my feed. Breaking news: Johnny Sexton has copped a 3-match ban for bringing the game into disrepute by abusing none other than Jaco de Piper after Leinster's loss to La Rochelle in the Champions Cup final on May 20th. European Professional Club Rugby's disciplinary committee said Sexton's tirade included pointing his finger at them and shouting at them something to this effect: "It's a disgrace you guys can't get the big decisions right," probably accompanied by expletives, most likely the F word. Which is, I think, it's interesting that they're saying probably and include something to this effect without actually quoting him fully and still being able to ban him for 3 games. It's kind of, for me, it's like, you should be pretty certain about what he's saying and not saying, oh, he said something to this effect, but you should be pretty solid in what he said and should be pretty certain if he's used expletives or not, because that adds an element to it as well for me. If he did swear, then that adds more to it for me. And especially how they swore, like the content of what you said there with those swearing is important. Like if you said it's a fucking disgrace you guys can't get the big decisions right, or it's a disgrace you fucking guys can't get the big decisions right, there's difference between that as well, because one's more personally abusive than the other. But I just think it's quite interesting that the same referees copped a lot of flack about his style of refereeing by some world-class players not that far apart.
It is interesting as well because, and a lot of people were talking about this, he's been banned for 3 games. That ban ends when the World Cup starts because they've got 3 warm-up games. Erasmus got banned for a whole year for a couple of tweets and a few other things. I think he had a tunnel indiscretion as well. It is interesting. Look, I'm all for players playing at the World Cup. I would have loved a 4-match ban and send a message to him like, you will miss a World Cup game because of this, and really state that we're behind these refs. But as you said, it sounds, I haven't read any articles. The only thing I read was apparently he said he was a fucking disgrace. But what you're saying now, even I haven't read it. I just read a line of a heading. Would make me believe that he's definitely directed something towards them. No one's been able to pick up what was said and how it was said. So interesting though, very interesting. Obviously you can't speak to refs that way. sometimes it gets the better of you as a player. Johnny Sexton's I imagine he's got a very clean record. I haven't heard of him ever doing anything like this before. But you do have to protect the referees because if we didn't have them, we wouldn't have a game. But it is, as you said, interesting point that we've had Yarko again.
And as well, just to add on as well, that yes, we've talked about Yarko a lot this week and his refereeing, and even this Johnny Sexton thing now. But again, we want to reiterate sort of like what we said earlier in the year is that when all the Razzie stuff sort of happened and all the stuff about different referees bringing out tweets and stuff like that, it should never be the fans going into their DMs, abusing them and threatening them. That's not on. You know, no matter what my feelings are towards Yarko Piper after that game, that's not something you do. That takes it above and beyond. You could definitely criticize someone's performance in a public forum like this. You could even send them a message saying, I think your refereeing wasn't that good because, hey, that's what happens with everyone. That's what players get as well, but you can't take it that next step further. You can't be threatening them. You can't be going over the top about it. I mean, even the messaging thing I think is borderline. Probably something public, like a public tweet at them. It's probably a little bit more on the level, I guess, but I guess most people have their DMs turned off from strangers anyway. There's public criticism. No one's immune from public criticism, and no one should be immune from public criticism. But where it goes into threatening territory and abusive territory, that's where it gets taken too far, and that's what people need to learn. That some things are just not on. And so I hope no one takes it that far. And if you do, you should never attend a rugby game or watch a rugby game again.
Totally. Australia, eh?
Yes. Yeah. Once again, not broadcast on Stan. He actually put me onto the live stream for this one. I didn't even know it was being played on the Friday. I thought it was being played on the Saturday, which shows how well they advertise Australia A. But from what I saw of this game, Australia A were just throwing the ball around like it was a game of touch footy or something. Right? When they sort of switched on a bit more in the second half, we saw a bit better what they can do. You know, where they closed the gap somewhat. But the deficit they found themselves in after the first half was just ridiculous. It was ill-disciplined, and it's everything that was wrong with Australian rugby. To be honest, it's poor decision making and poor discipline. And there are bright points, sure, and the fact that I'm able to make up the deficit, players getting healthy from injury and things like that as well. But it just looked like players went into that without a plan, really. They looked like they didn't take Tonga seriously, and it backfired them. And that's a great sign for Tonga as well, but it's all sobering for Australia. And you can't be doing that. You've got to be better. And Eddie Jones will have been looking at that and would have been ruthless in picking apart anyone he saw making terrible decisions. And that, Bernard Foley had probably one of his worst games in a while. I love Bernard Foley, but he made some terrible decisions that game that I just didn't understand. Lockie Swinton as well, right? Beloved by a lot of Aussies for bringing the hammer, just again lost his head, and it's just you just can't understand it. So look, there's work to be done for Australia A for sure. It's just there's work to be done for the Wallabies. Yeah,
and from the Tonga point of view, what a win! Like again, everyone's saying, "Oh, look, they've got these new names, so they should be winning these games." But it's one thing to have those names, and it's another thing to put out the performance and get the job done. And Petal Falau looked incredible. Peter Aki looked incredible. The second five, I think they gelled really well. William Havili stepped up big time from his Moana Pacifica season. It's definitely looked like it's added some oomph there. It gave me a lot of faith in Moana Pacifica working for Tonga nations as well, those islander nations, because it was a good mix of those international-based players and Moana Pacifica-based players, and boy, they put on a performance. They fronted up. I thought, their backline was ridiculously talented, and I thought that's where they'd keep themselves in the game, but the forward pack definitely fronted up and showed some mongrel, and I was the same with you. I watched that game, and I was like, man, Lockie Swinton, this is a game for him. He's involved in everything. He's, being that bastard that we say you need in a team, but he's just got to stay on the field, man. If he can stay on the field. I sat there watching it and going, this is your missing number 6. This is it. This is what you need on the field. He'll hit harder. He'll tackle harder. He will play harder. and he just got to stop doing dumb shit.
Yeah. For me as well, I just back to the Wallabies a little bit. I liked what I saw out of our back rowers. I thought McWright had a good game. Valentini as well was awesome. Holloway was solid when he's in there. But I think actually starting Wallabies back row, I actually reckon Bobby V at 6, Langy Gleeson at 8, Hooper at 7, and then you can rotate those guys as well. Like you can rotate McWright in. You could and you could sort of move some of the pieces around there. You could take Gleeson off at 8, move Valentini back to 8 from 6, and then bring on another 6 like a Holloway or something if you need an extra line out option. Like it was very positive signs there, and yeah, I think Gleeson adds an extra dimension to that. But I did like the way that Fraser McWright played as well.
Yeah, I thought he had a good game, and I've forever been a fan of Bobby V at 6. I don't know, like I understand why you're playing at 8, but his best position to me is a 6, and I think he will. The Wallabies should try and get him there by moving someone else there.
And yeah, get Gleeson on, and
Exactly.
you've got Rob Leota as well. You've got Pete Samu. Like the back row depth for the Wallabies is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And yeah, I just love to see a bit more variation in that because Samu and Leota are both really great players. As well.
Definitely.
And Langy Gleeson, I think as well, it needs to see Wallabies colours.
Totally. The All Blacks XV got a win over Japan, a very good win. Billy Proctor scored 4 tries, and they look good. Stephen Perifetta, again, putting his hand up and making the Blues wonder why they didn't start him at 10 and Bonan Barrett at fullback for most of the season because, god damn it, he was good again against Japan, which I think... I don't know if that was the Japanese strongest team, but if it was, I think there'll be a few alarm bells because it's back-to-back games has conceded, I think, just about 40 points. I think it was 38 in the first game, 42 or something like that in this game, or even 47. So I think there will be a little bit of alarm bells, but I'm sure there's still some players that aren't fully fit yet and firing, and they're holding back to the World Cup. And, at a World Cup is where Japan puts it on, so we will be watching for them. The under-20s also wrapped up. France got the W. Congratulations, France. Ireland finishing second. It was South Africa third, England fourth, Wallabies, Junior Wallabies fifth, Wales sixth, Baby All Blacks seventh, Georgia eighth, and then I don't know from there down. So good top 8. Disappointment, I think, for both our teams to not make the top 4, but with the way the tournament's set up, I think a lot of good experience for those young players.
And the way they finished as well was good.
Totally.
The Junior Wallabies especially. A lot of great names there. Teddy Wilson, probably the highlighted name for Waratahs and Wallabies fans as a name for the future. Look out for towards the next World Cup. And yeah, just shows that there is talent in the coming up for Australia.
Definitely. And same for Baby ABs. I saw Peter Larkai score one of the better tries, and it just made my heart skip a beat, and I was like, that's something that Artie Savia
Sure that's the organ that you want to be talking about? Sure that's the right organ there?
Yes, my friend, that is the right organ. On to the women. The Black Ferns won the Pacific 4 by beating USA, coming from behind after an early red card. I was a little bit worried at halftime when I saw it was 19-7. But the Black Ferns dug deep and managed to turn it around. Whereas the Wallaroos were beaten by, I think it was 45-12 or something like that by Canada.
It was a bad loss.
Bad loss for them,
Very bad loss.
Which I think they'll be bitterly disappointed. They still qualify for the WXV1 in New Zealand later this year. So that's good for them. But again, you can't be losing these games when you're trying to grow the sport like they are and trying to compete with the Black Ferns, especially by the amount it was. But I imagine I don't want to give them an out, but I'm going to give them an out. This is probably the first tour a lot of these girls have ever done. You know what I mean? Like, probably haven't, like, you got to think back before COVID, when COVID shut everything down, then they had the World Cup in New Zealand, and so they haven't travelled all the way over Canada and USA and probably played back-to-back games travelling. So a learning experience, I imagine, and I imagine a lot of them will take a lot from it. But yeah, bitterly disappointing to lose. On to Coach's Corner, where we talk about the coaches going around the rugby world. Now, obviously, we've talked a lot about Razzie. He just did the news just purely because all this talk about refereeing and his funny wee tweet. But I did want to touch base on what I think New Zealand is doing really well at the moment, and that's behind Jason Ryan, the forwards coach for the All Blacks, who has just, since he's come on board, absolutely changed the forward pack, I just want to see the outlook of our forward pack, the ruthlessness of our forward pack. South Africa scored the first ever maul try against the All Blacks when Jason Ryan's been the forward head coach on the weekend. And even that, they defended that maul really well to start off with, and it just got a bit unlucky with the way it turned. So I think he'll look at it, he'll analyse it, because we all know Jason Ryan's fantastic coach now, definitely showing it. But he'll be disappointed, but it wasn't the worst defended maul I've ever seen in my life. And I'm just so excited that he's on board. He'll be on board again with Razor, because whatever he's doing, it's working. We win scrum penalties. Our props are looking the best they've ever looked. He's just done a fantastic job with this four-pack, and I'm really excited for him to be staying in and around the All Black setup for as long as possible. Now, onto your out of the coaches' corner. That was not a lot of coaches to talk back. Obviously, Eddie's done a lot of talking, but I don't think we'll have him back onto the coaches' corner until next week or 2 weeks from now, with the Rugby Championship taking a break, and see how he goes at the Bledisloe. But Noah Lolosio and Jake Gordon, my friend.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting story here. So they are looking to sign with French top 14 clubs while the World Cup is on, because that competition will run through the World Cup. So a lot of French players obviously will be missing that competition. A lot of international players will be missing that competition. So those top 14 sides need to grab some depth. I think this is a great move. I think this is probably really positive for both these players. It's a chance to grow their game, learn different style of rugby as well, especially for Noah, such a young playmaker, to go over to France and learn from those coaches and from a system that produces good tens as well, and good playmakers in general is really good. Jake Gordon as well. Look, he's just a rugby player. It doesn't matter if it's Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere. He's just a rugby player. He wants to play rugby. So, yeah, I think it's good for both of them. And it probably speaks to what Eddie's thinking of his halfbacks. Nick White, Tate McDermott 1-2, and probably Ryan Lonergan as his third.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure Noah's going to sign as they call them medical jokers, as a joker, Rugby World Cup joker, for Toulon, because Dan Biggar plays there, and he'll be going to the World Cup with Wales.
Jake Gordon for Toulon. Jake Gordon looking at Toulon as well, because it's Baptiste stepped in or something. Whoever he's going to be the backup scrum half for France.
For France, sweet. Yeah. So look, like you said, it puts them out of contention if they do sign for the Rugby World Cup, but it's not the end of gold jerseys opportunities for them. But just an interesting little touch base on those outer Wallaby exodus that we may see over the next. If you don't make those squads and they're looking for medical jokers or Rugby World Cup jokers, as we say it, I imagine a few more will be brought on board. So just be ready to hear from both New Zealand and Wallabies.
I think for Noah Lolosio, it's better for Noah than it is for Jake.
Yeah.
Right? Because Noah needs to look before the next World Cup, right? The current stable of Wallabies 10s is Quade Cooper, Carter Gordon, Bernard Foley, it would seem, right? Based on Wallabies in Australia A. So he's the fourth man in the three-man race, right? In a three-spot race. But before the next World Cup, right, Quade's probably not going to play that one. Bernard's probably not going to play in that one. Sure, Johnny Sexton's playing still at 38. I don't think either of those guys are still going to be playing at Wallaby level at 38. So then and Carter Gordon will presumably be the starting 10 by that point and will have led the Wallabies to countless wins since then. So who's going to be his backup? Who's going to be his understudy? And that's where Noah could slot in quite nicely. That's where he sort of played. He showed he could do that at the Brumbies, where Debrasini sort of took the starting role and Noah came in and finished off games. Maybe that's where his strength lies. Maybe that's something he plays towards. Who knows? But there's going to be opportunities for tens for the Wallabies and Australia. In the near future for young guys like him. And I think just the opportunity to play overseas, to learn, and to be out of the Australian media scrutiny that he's probably one of the most heavily scrutinized Australian players in recent memory, right? Like, in terms of purely just gameplay, I guess, obviously there's off the field stuff with Israel Folau being heavily scrutinized, but I think in terms of just their gameplay, he's probably one of the most heavily scrutinized in recent memory. With the kid with a lot of promise that hasn't really lived up to it, still has a chance to do it though. He's very similar to maybe to a James O'Connor, where he comes into a late career revival kind of thing. Or it's even that is a bit premature because saying late career revival. He's 3 years into professional play or something like that. So, it's just a chance for him to develop more skills. So I really like this move from him, and recognizing where he sits and recognizing that he's got to get better, not sulking about it. He's going out and actively looking to improve it. I think Eddie will respect that as well.
Totally.
It's a big thing. Someone asked in our football group chat, why isn't Rory Arnold playing? It's because Rory Arnold chose to sit in Japan and not play rugby all year and get paid his contract rather than come back to Super Rugby or another competition, get paid a little bit less. Yeah, but then play rugby and then maybe be up for Wallabies selection. And that pissed Eddie off.
Yeah.
Right. So I think he'll like that from Noah, that he's not sulking or he's not just sitting on his ass. He's actually going out and seeking more opportunities. He's looking to improve. He's looking to keep playing and keep his skill set up. I think that's something that the new coach will respect.
Totally. Obviously, Bledisloe is 2 weeks away now. Bring on the Bledisloe. Bring on the Bledisloe. Bring on the Bledisloe. So, we are going to be releasing a couple of YouTube videos with some challenges coming very soon. So stay tuned on our YouTube for that. But I thought, to finish off this podcast, let's discuss a couple of our most memorable moments from Bledisloe. Now, this memorable moment probably is memorable for both sides because of the test match that it was. And so this is my memorable moment. I'll take you back to Sydney, 2000, 110,000 fans in Stadium Australia in Sydney. The All Blacks shoot out to a lead. I think it was 24-0. And the Wallabies come back to make it 24-all at half time. Before they take a lead, 35-34 with mere minutes to go, the Wallabies look to have it won. Before the ball goes wide to Jonah Lomu, who goes in untouched and scores to win the game 39-35 for the All Blacks. And what is considered the greatest ever test played. What a game. What a Bledisloe moment. So that is my most memorable Bledisloe moment from the All Blacks.
For me, it's hard, obviously, as well. It's hard to think about what's a really good. There's a couple that you can pick. Look, I think 2019, when Australia stomped New Zealand in Perth, is a great one to think about. A 47-26 win. That's a good memory to have. There's also, I guess you could look at other wins by Australia over New Zealand. 2017 in Brisbane, for example. But I think I don't think you could say. I think every Wallabies fan has to think of the last time we won the Bledisloe, which is 2002, and a tight game in Sydney as well, 16-14, right? That where we retained the Bledisloe for the last time. That's a faint memory for me. That's 21 years ago. So that for me, the last time we raised the Bledisloe has to be my fondest Bledisloe memory, because it's hard to have other fond memories since then. Really,
That's spoken like a true Wallaby fan.
Yeah, but it's realistic, So I think last year had a chance to be another memorable one. If the Wallabies had pulled that out, with Bernard Foley coming in at the last minute, all the things that happened with the team around that time, it had a chance and it didn't work out. So yeah, but that is what it is. It just means that when we win it next, it's going to be all the more sweet.
You've got to win it first, and that's the issue.
It's statistically likely to happen.
It is. But for now, that is us done. Been one hell of a weekend for myself. For you, probably a bit of a struggle. We get it. It's a tough Monday, but bring on the Bledisloe, Hughesy?
Right. The Blues won Origin 3, so that's keeping me through,
that got you
fallen into a total pit of despair.
Yeah, that would have been bad. You would have been in some real trouble.
I went 7 out of 7 in my NRL tipping, so
Oh, there you go. Look at you. Yep.
you know, you got to take the little wins. Touch footy on Sunday had a great game as well, so you know that's
Look at you. Look at you, buddy. Well,
taking out my frustration of the Wallabies game into playing touch footy, community footy.
Putting on some side steps, even chucked out a fin. That's how angry you got.
Yeah. Look, the 5'1" lady we play with didn't appreciate the palm to the forehead, but
got to teach her a lesson.
That
This is how the Wallabies should play.
Yeah, exactly right. You know, no holds bar. You know, don't be afraid of anyone, and don't take it easy on anyone.
There you go. Bring on the Bledisloe. Bring on the Bledisloe. Yes. All right, that's us for another week.
It's going to be a great game. I can't wait to see what Eddie can do between now and then. What roster decisions he makes. Carter Gordon starting at 10. You know, don't put Matt Phillip in the squad. You know, things like that. You know, just can't wait to see what he does. Not Tom Wright.
Tom Wright will be starting fullback, and then all hope will be lost.
Yeah. I know. Well, you know, look, I'd absolutely. There's nothing I love more than players who I've lost faith in proving me wrong. I would love that to happen. I'd love for a switch to be flicked for Tom Wright, where he just understands that as a fullback, I've got to hold on to the ball and not knock it on in my own 22. You know, I'd love for that switch to be flicked and for him to be a good fullback. I'd love for him to prove me wrong. I'd love for him to shut me up. I'd love that to happen. Love that to happen. I don't think it will, though.
There it is. Thank you for joining us. I have been Luke.
Prove me wrong.
Has been Husey. We will talk to you next time, which we'll be preparing for the Bledisloe a week closer in a week's time. So we'll see you there. For now, thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Peace.